Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, a Human Element Series, episode 159. I am Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer, as well as the Innocent Lives Foundation, and I've been hosting this podcast since way back in 2009. This episode is sponsored by Social Engineer LLC or social-engineer.com. We're a trusted information security vendor. I'm sure you know this. You can't turn the news on without seeing another ransomware attack or some kind of phishing attack or something horrible happening to a large, small, or even medium-sized company. That's our focus. We try to help people understand what those attacks are and how they can defend against them and how you can really strengthen your strongest and best asset in your company, which is your people, through behavioral change and understanding how you can motivate them to be more secure. Check things out on social-engineer.com for more information. Hey, did you know that we have a Slack channel? There's over 1,000 people in there now. We have conversations about behavior, psychology, influence, persuasion, phishing, vishing, all the different vectors. We got people just getting into the field. We even have a career board where 7 people have found jobs with different companies throughout the world. So you can join that with the link in the show notes. And if you don't see it there, just ping me on Twitter at HumanHacker and I'll get you the link and you can join us there. And if you haven't heard, you need to check out Clutch, the best rock band on the planet Earth. They're the music for the show. And I'm personal fans of them. You can check them out on pro-rock.com. They have a new tour coming up and a new album coming out. So you definitely want to check that out, especially if you haven't heard of them. Best rock band on the planet. Which brings me to another thing that Neil does that's awesome. He's on the board of the ILF, the Innocent Lives Foundation, which you can check out, innocentlivesfoundation.org. I'm so proud of my team over there. We just closed our 405th case. We've been working really hard with law enforcement globally to help stop crimes against children and those who produce child abuse material as well as traffic children. And I'm just proud to say how much we've done this past year. Annual report will be coming out soon and we'll have some really great announcements. So check out the innocentlivesfoundation.org. And in case you missed the announcement, recently we launched our brand new conference. Well, it's not brand new. This is year 3. Yes, no, 4, year 3. Yes, I should know that. You think I would know that, but I don't. It used to be the Human Hacking Conference. We recently changed it to the Human Behavior Conference for a very specific reason. We're not just talking about hacking people. We're trying to understand how behavior can be modified and changed to make your life better, how you can modify your own behavior. So we're not talking about manipulation, but how you can learn skills from nonverbal experts, conflict resolution experts, influence and rapport experts, even deception experts, and how you can learn to use those skills every day in your life to better your life. So check out some of the programs happening March 24 through 26. I should know that too, in 2022, live here in Orlando at humanbehaviorcon.com, which brings me to an exciting announcement with our guest here today, Anne-Maartje, who is going to be one of our trainers there at the conference. We'll talk about that a little bit, but I've been friends with Anne for quite a long time. I met her through another good friend, which you all know from the podcast, Joe Navarro. And for over 20 years, Anne-Maartje has been a behavioral advisor, consultant, chairwoman, and keynote speaker. On top of that, she's the CEO and founder of the Behavior Company, which is based in Amsterdam, where she helps customize personal development programs for companies and organizations all over the world, not just there in Amsterdam. As I mentioned, she's going to be coming to Orlando live to do a special training that she'll be talking a little bit about here today. She actually has a couple programs on the Human Behavior Conference here in March of 2022. And she's well known throughout Europe for giving trainings and lectures at universities and other places throughout the Netherlands. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's such a great honor and so good to see you again.
Yeah, it is good to see you. It's been we talk a lot, but it's been a little bit since we've talked last. I think we've both been really, really busy.
Yeah, busy times, very busy times. Yeah. Sadly, not traveling, but online, very busy times.
Yes, I hear you. So let's talk about a little bit about you first, right? So in case someone hasn't heard our conversations before, tell me a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get into conflict resolution? What made you go that path?
Well, it started, I'll start with the beginning where I was in absolute awe on how people in businesses are, because I studied dramatic expression through verbal and physical communication. So it's very focused on nonverbal communication. And I was invited to speak for in a business setting, CEOs who wanted to have more stage presence. And I thought everybody knows this, you know, you know how to look into an audience, you know how to make contact, you know how to stand on a stage and actually deliver something. And little did I know that a lot of people, and I'm talking about 20 years ago, they had no clue and nobody heard about nonverbal communication. So that intrigued me. And then I thought, okay, this is something I really want to do, I must say. So that's when I started to focus on what is behavior in businesses and what can people learn from it? How can they become aware of all these elements? And more, I realized in businesses, the communication isn't as effective as people want and need. And usually behavior is much more of a factor than they understand. So they're very focused on content. And when it comes to conflict, more and more you see that people try to emphasize on what they want to say. So literally get something across, but they don't realize that behavior factors is a factor in that. So throughout the years, that became my specialty, to really focus on how to have more effective communication, not only in a normal team setting, but also when there's a conflict, or how can we prevent a conflict even.
But can people really do that? Can you teach them to control that behavior, which seems to be based on emotion? So how does that work?
Well, it is, as you said in the beginning, is it control? Because when people think about control, they kind of start to freeze, like, oh, I shouldn't ooze out anything. I should be totally neutral. And that's not the way I think is effective. So I think it's very important that you understand that you have to have comfort in a conversation, but that you also have to take notice of the other person. And when emotions are involved, especially in difficult conversations or in conflicts, I always refer to it as difficult conversations. You see that people are so overwhelmed by emotions that they forget to look at the other person. But by teaching them to maybe be less observant of your own behavior and focusing on the other person as well, it something magical happens, you could say. It helps them to calm down. So, and also making them aware of their own behavior under stress or in conflict. Then they know when they show this, when they start realizing, oh, this is what I'm doing right now, this is not effective, then I do see it that they can tone it down. So I wouldn't say fully control, but tone it down and make it more effective for the setting in that moment.
That's amazing. Okay. So what I hear you saying is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure I'm getting this right, that empathy and self-awareness would be really important in learning to be a better communicator.
Yes. And if I may add, observation skills. Yeah. So the fact is, if, for instance, you want to get something across in a conflict, people are always focused on, this is what I want to say. This is what I want to do. Now, let me rephrase that. This is what I want to get across. But they are not focused on the setting. They don't understand, if I say it on Monday morning, it's not helpful. The message will be lost because this person is, still waking up from this weekend or something. So it's very important that they take all the elements into consideration. And that has to do with empathy, that has to do with self-awareness, but that also has to do with observation and adapting skills, as you said before.
Okay, so let's paint a scenario, because I'm really curious how we would apply this. You pop into work Monday morning, and that one person who just always irritates you, they grate on you. You don't know why even. It's just like that. When they say things, they tend to grate your nerves. And that person comes up with a little bit of an attitude and asks you to do something, to take care of a certain task. And you are just irritated. And that irritation or anger is going to make you react a certain way. Before words come out, what would you tell someone to do so you're not reacting with that emotion?
Yeah. I think it starts 3 times before. So when you're irritated the first time, okay, that happens. We're all humans. When you're irritated the second time, I'm always alert, like, hey, this is the second time. And the third time, it might be a pattern. And it's up to you to understand, this is, as we talk about self-awareness, this is interesting. Why is this person irritating me? What is it? Because you say, I don't know what it is. that's where I would say, have to investigate or have to do self-analysis. What is it that what is their behavior? What triggers it? And if possible, if you understand what it is, you can even address that. And if you cannot address it due to circumstances, you have to find a way to help yourself and to understand, oh, this is my irritation or my problem with this person. And then it will irritate you less immediately because you understand what's happening in the communication.
I love this advice because it's so easy to say, well, Anne, you irritated me, so I want you to change these 5 things about yourself. But your advice is, let me look at myself, and let me see why. Because maybe I'm irritated and it's not your fault. This is just your personality. You have this kind of a voice, or you speak this way. And I had someone in my past who spoke like that and they irritate me. It's nothing to do with you. But that self-awareness can help me introspectively fix it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. And don't forget, if it doesn't work that way, because sometimes people are afraid of the conversation, you do have to address certain things in a business situation. But it has to do with, is this effective for how are you working together? Is this effective? Sometimes it's just a personal irritation. Okay. But if it's going to this place where it's affecting you, where it's affecting your work, where it's affecting your objectives, where it's affecting the way you treat others, then you really have to address it. So then it goes from self-awareness, self-reflection, self-change. Then it has to change with, okay, I have to have a conversation about this because else we cannot work together. And I've seen this in teams where people are irritated. They try to fix it in a way it is avoiding the conversation. So they're not doing anything with it. But then we invite them to talk about it, and we help them with skills in my company to actually make this conversation happen. And then all of a sudden somebody understands, oh, this is the behavior I was showing. I understand now what I can change. And the other person, oh, I know why I was irritated. So then you have a conversation about it.
So let's say it is legit though. Okay. So let's say it's me and you have a problem. And every time I talk to you, I am a little harsh, right? I'm a little over direct and I'm harsh. And you say, okay, this isn't you do your self analysis. It's not just me. This is not some past thing. Chris is pretty harsh with me. How do you start a conversation that's going to lead to some benefit without saying like, hey man, every time you talk to me, you cut me down, you're harsh, and you make me feel bad. Like that's going to make me defensive. So how do you start even that? Because that sounds like a really hard conversation.
It is a hard conversation, and it's never easy. This is what we say, but there's where the skills come in. So it might be that you have this style where this would work perfectly. Like, Chris, come on. You're a very open guy. You're easy. You're focused on your work. So it might be that in our way of working, that would be a perfect approach. The thing is that what usually people do, they blur it out, or, because the tension has built up, and all of a sudden, like, okay, I'm going to say this, and they blur it out. What they have failed to do usually is to analyze what would be the best way for you and me. So we're colleagues. Where am I going to have the conversation? What way am I going to have the conversation? When am I going to have the conversation? So it could be that my analysis on that part would be, hey, Chris, come on, you're irritating me. Don't do this, but be specific on what I've observed on the behavior. But if you're a different person, I might think, you know what? When we are at the office, I'm going to go to the coffee place, coffee machine, and we're going to have a coffee together. And I say, hey, Chris, do you have a moment later on today? Something I would like to share with you. So there could be a totally different approach if you're a different person. The most important part is that you understand what is needed. What do I need as a person? So what is comfortable for me? And mostly also, if I want to have an effect, not just telling you something, but if I want to change your behavior, if I want you to make aware of something, well, then it's nice if you understand and it's effective how I communicate it.
Yeah. Okay. I like that because I think you're like, that's such a valuable point to think about the how, when, and what I'm going to say before I do it. when you were talking about that, like blurting out, I started thinking, it's like a volcano, like all of a sudden it's going to erupt. You don't know where things are going to go, and that's not very controlled or planned. But if I say, okay, listen, maybe Monday mornings is not the best time for me to talk to Anne about this problem. Maybe over lunch, when things are calmer and when there's not a bunch of people around, so there's no embarrassment, right? And I may decide all that and then go, okay, I'm gonna have that. Yeah, that sounds like such a great way of thinking through it, because you set the stage for this difficult conversation.
Yes.
Now, what do you do if you do all that right? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what if you do it all right, but I just don't respond? Like, you did everything. You thought about it. You had the right time. The words were not aggressive, but I'm just like, I don't want to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
Then what?
Then you can have a difficult conversation about the difficult conversation.
Oh, wow.
Like, why don't you want to talk about it? It's complex. It is because people think, oh, if I'm doing it right, then magically everything will be solved. No, it's a difficult conversation. So there are different goals, different objectives. You might have a different background. Your norms and values are different than mine. So it might be the case that I failed in how I prepared it. Still, it doesn't mean that it has to do with me. If you say, like, I don't want to talk about it, maybe you're having a bad day, and that moment that I chose initially was a good idea, but maybe you haven't slept. So that is always a question, like, okay, is there another time when we can talk about it? So you might say, yeah, let's do this on Friday. So we have a different timing, but it could also be about the content. I don't want to talk about you, about our behavior here or something. So it's very important to understand what the element is that you don't want to talk about. Is it the time? Is it the place? Is it the content again? And it doesn't mean that it is done with one conversation, because more may be needed. People, it might be in the beginning, it might be in halfway, or even afterwards, that it is still not done. And it might be that so maybe you're thinking, okay, this was a great conversation, but in 3 weeks, somebody might say, I still don't like what we talked about. So it's not a one setting. And that's why it has all these elements, and people forget all these elements.
Yeah.
But
so how do you instruct people to remember all of that? Because I was just thinking that when you were saying that, like, wow, it's like a choose your own path book, but that has endless paths, right? So how do you remember it all?
Well, again, it helps to have your own, to create your own comfort. So it is helpful not to get too cognitive about it, because then you might not be in the moment. And that's very important when we talk about self-awareness and observation. So usually it helps to talk about it up front. So to have all the elements to talk about it, to understand what they might be. Also to prepare the elements, again, as we talked about. But for me, what is a very helpful metaphor that I teach is the helicopter metaphor. And the helicopter metaphor is used, and literally a helicopter can do a lot of things. And that might help you to remember in a conversation. So for instance, we're having a conversation and I have to remember to zoom out. So if I feel that I'm getting tensed, for instance, and my emotion starts to rise as the volcano, as you just said, then it's important to understand, okay, I have to zoom out. A helicopter can observe both parties that are talking. So I have to make sure that I'm very much aware of this. But for instance, a helicopter can also zoom in. You might say some details. You might say some words, as you know, in your business, which is very important. Certain words, words have meaning, and certain words are very specific when somebody says that. So you have to zoom in. Yeah. We also advise people to understand that sometimes you can get out of the helicopter. Maybe the setting isn't okay. That you should limit your baggage. If it's like 3 times you already irritated, that is baggage in the conversation. So there are much more things, but in general, you can use the helicopter as a metaphor to help.
I love it. I love that. And it is so fitting. All the different pieces you said. Okay, let's talk about management and leadership. How important do you think these skills, because this sounds like, this is great for everybody, but how important do you think that understanding, what's the word, like the behavioral awareness understanding is for managers and leaders in an organization?
Yeah, it's the most essential thing, I would say. I see this all the time wherever I go, and it doesn't matter if it's a very small company with 6 people or, banks and like big companies. What you see is that if people do not understand what's going on, if they don't understand what people feel, what they are going through, what is happening on their part, you might think that you can still lead a business focusing on your objectives and focusing on money making, so to say, but you will fail. And this is what we've seen in businesses everywhere.
So how would you, I don't want to give away everything, but I just want like maybe a little idea. How would you instruct or encourage managers to begin to learn about behavioral awareness? Like, do they all need psychology degrees, or how would they go about learning this?
Well, they have to go to our conference.
No, I wasn't planning that, but that's a great answer, by the way. So
Yes, you were. No. But seriously, I think I must say it. I think it has improved over the years. So I'm doing this more than 20 years now, and in the beginning, I would say there was less focus on behavior than there is now. So you see their managers, have all these sites, management books, courses that they can take. It is a big factor now. And I think if it starts with understanding, if they understand it, you have a different way. Some people like to read. Some people like to, listen to TED Talks. I think it doesn't matter as long as they pick up on something. What I do hope is that they take it to the next level to practice their behavior. Because what I see is that a lot of managers inform themselves. So they read books, they understand it, but then they still have to transfer this into their own behavior when they're working with teams or when they're working with a colleague. And that is difficult for them.
Yeah. Do you find that companies that have upper level management that focus on behavioral awareness tend to have less conflict down the ladder?
I think so. If they focus on down the ladder as well, because sometimes you see that when they're focused on behavioral awareness in their team, it still doesn't mean that they observe everything. But in essence, if a lot of companies are aware of this, and you even have these slogans with it, but still, as we've seen in the media a lot, you can still have slogans. You can have great programs. You can have good HR backup, but still you have to be alert and aware, and to create a system where you open up to each other, where you trust each other, where you talk about it, and that is not always what's happening. But I think if you have this, you have less possibility of conflict. It doesn't mean there's no conflict, but there's less.
No conflict would seem almost impossible as long as humans are involved, right?
That's not possible.
Right, because we're always going to have a differing of opinions at something.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you don't have to be afraid of conflict in itself. It depends on what is a conflict, because sometimes people say, conflict is growth. It depends on what you do with it. Yeah. So if you see it as, okay, we have two different opinions, or we have a different focus on our project, if we talk about it and we align at a certain point, fantastic. It's more than when people do not talk about it, it becomes difficult.
That's a really valuable point, I think, because I think it's easy to look at conflict and say, boy, I want a conflict-free company. But what you just said really resonates with me. We've had multiple really poor ex-employee problems. And instead of just ignoring them and saying, oh, it's all their fault, they did all this stuff, we tend to look at, okay, what things could we have done different? Or where can we change? Or if there's nothing, what can we learn from this to not ever have that happen again? And I find that conflict does help us grow. It makes us better the next time, as long as we do that process that you said, that self-awareness check and, talking about the problems, which is not always easy because sometimes introspection shines a light on where you messed up,
Yeah. And that's what I mean with comfort, as Joe talks about all the time, comfort, discomfort. We don't want conflict. Yeah. It's not nice. It's like we want to have a nice, carefree work setting. But we also, as you said, we're humans, and we also see that where the challenge starts, that's where you grow. And also when you have companies that want to avoid conflict, I've literally been hired in some companies to, how can I say this, spice things up, because everything was so calm that management thought this cannot be true. This cannot be real. And it's not that I'm deliberately messing things up, but they were so focused on, we have to be nice to each other. We don't want conflict, that they created a conflict setting where it was all numb. People were in a way were numb. So they invited me to get people talking about, okay, what can we learn from this? What should we do different?
That's fascinating. That's interesting. Yeah. I could see where, as a company owner, where you might get like lulled into a false sense of security almost, because you're like, wow, look, there's no conflict. Everything's great. Everything's calm. But having your employees numb, that's not healthy either. Yeah. There's no passion. Yeah. There's no motivation. People don't feel that drive.
Exactly.
That's an interesting
and it's
problem.
Scary for them. And if they start doing it, they're hesitant, like, oh, should I say something? Yeah. And they start, well, it's not that big of a problem, but, and then slowly they come up with feedback. Wow. And it's kind of similar what you do. You go into companies as well to see where can they improve. Well, we do this with the behavior part.
Yeah, so. That's fascinating. Yeah, that's. So let's move to a different topic. March 24 through 26, 2022. I already made that announcement at the beginning. We have this really exciting human behavior conference here in Orlando. You are coming in to do multiple sessions. We'll talk about that, but let's talk about your first session, because you have a 3-hour training session on what? What is the topic?
Critical communication.
Ooh.
And then a behavioral approach to it. Because what people, as we talked about, you can talk about critical communications, difficult communication, but what can you do? And what we're going to talk about, and I'm not just going to talk, because they also have to interact in this session, because people need to understand, okay, what is a difficult conversation, but mostly if it's becoming critical, what can I do? How can I adapt? If I have to change a setting, how can I do this very quickly? All these elements are in this session, and 3 hours it's a short time, but we're going to go for it. Yeah.
I'm excited because I think that's an important point you brought up, which is this is not a lecture. It's not a 3-hour lecture. It's a workshop. People are coming in and they're going to have exercises and things that they're going to take away to go use the skills you're teaching them right away. That's exciting to me, because I don't mind sitting through speeches, but when you give me something actionable, now I feel like I really benefited, because I can go away which happens to me all the time in talking to you. You always give me something I can go use right away, which is awesome. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too, because congratulations on this amazing program you have, because I'm so honored when I see the lineup, as you would say, and it's a concert, like the lineup. And there's so many great trainers and speakers there. And I think if people go there, they have to understand, you have to be active. There's so much to gain from this conference. And that's why we specifically chosen the behavioral approach. Because if you go away and you don't do anything with it, yeah, that's okay. That's your choice. But it would be so helpful if you pick up on things that you can actually implement in your line of work, in your daily work.
And then you and I have a mutual friend, Joe Navarro. I mean, we talk about like Joe, like he's my dad, which don't tell him I said that, but I would take him as my dad any day of the week. But anyhow, we have this mutual friend, and like my mind is blown that you're getting this awesome course, that you're going to teach a co-session with him, for another day. And what is that session all about?
Yeah, I'm so honored. I mean, we both work with him, but this is really exceptional because we are creating this fantastic setting where we talk about difficult personalities. So Joe wrote this book, Dangerous Personalities, and we really want to help people to take. So when we talk about critical communication, difficult communications, it's like with people you come across in the workplace, but there are also people in the workplace and in private situations that you have to be extra careful and alert with. And Joe wrote the book Dangerous Personalities, and we thought, okay, we need to help people to understand how can I identify these individuals when in a work setting or somewhere else, but also how can I interact with them. So it's not for everybody, I think, because it's going to be about, for specific personalities, and it might bring up some feelings with others because it's so intense when you work with these people, and it has an emotional. It can drain you. All these elements are in there. But I think if people really want to understand, okay, how can I help myself, my company, and even people around me to prevent myself from being hurt with these dangerous personalities, it's an amazing course. Yeah, if I say so myself.
I mean, what a fascinating idea, right? And from my understanding, this is the first time this is ever being taught anywhere. Yes. Because Joe, that book, it sits right here behind my head on my shelf, right? That Joe, the book, Dangerous Personalities. There's so many great tidbits in there about working with narcissists or borderlines or emotionally unstable people. And even if I can't diagnose, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but still sometimes you're working with someone and you're like, wow, that's really weird. I don't know what to do with this. And I've used the chapters of that book so much to learn how to deal with those things. Now you take that and you blend it with your expertise in having those very difficult conversations with people. Like I'm not going to have the time to sit through it. And I want to myself. I want to be in that course because it sounds like it's just going to be life. We all work with people who can be difficult. And nowadays, especially with the pandemic and things like that in this country, emotional instability has gone through the roof. So, learning to deal with people who might be suffering with those things, I think is a critical skill now.
Yeah. And you have to be very alert that sometimes we observe behavior and we might think, oh, this leads to, or let me rephrase that. Sometimes you observe somebody in the workplace and you might think, oh, this is a narcissist, but you have to be very careful with that. So that's one of the things we want to get across, like be very careful when you analyze. And that's why the book is so amazing, because there are all these behavioral traits in there. If you see them and if you see more and more and more of them, then you understand, okay, if I'm having a difficult conversation with that person, I have to take everything I know to a different level. It's a totally different way of having a critical communication. And you have these people in the workplace more than you know. But we have to be careful to not think, oh, somebody's crying, oh, it's emotionally unstable. No, we have to have certain traits to observe that. Yeah.
Well, that's going to be so valuable, because I've heard that before where like people will say, oh, well, he's just a narcissist. And that is an easy word to throw out, but a pretty serious diagnosis. There's a difference in having a little bit of an ego and being a complete narcissist. So that alone will be a valuable skill to be able to learn how to balance that, because getting saying that someone is a certain characteristic and then reacting to that could be very dangerous in your communications if you're reacting to the wrong characteristic. Yeah. Wow.
And also what you do with it, not only in behavior, but also, for instance, one of the elements that is very, very important. How do you document things? Do you write things down? A lot of people, when they're having difficult conversations, they forget to write this down. But when you're working with dangerous personalities or people of flawed of character, you really have to be aware, okay, is this the time and place to have this conversation? Should I write it down or not? If you're working with somebody who's very paranoid and you're choosing, for instance, to write things down, you might not be able to have a conversation because they might be so panic, in panic, like, why are you writing this down? They challenge you, like, what are you doing with this?
Right.
Is this going to everybody? So not knowing that you're dealing with a certain trait can ruin a conversation.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. I mean, if you came to me with a conflict and with a pad and paper and everything I said, you started writing, I'd be like, wait, what's happening? Are we just talking or what's going on here? That's a good point. Didn't even think about that. You have to really think that all those little aspects through.
All those aspects.
You know, one of the things that excites me most about the Human Behavior Conference is, the trainings are amazing and I can talk about them forever, but it's the personal part of the conference where, like, those evening sessions when we're all just hanging out and getting to have conversation with people. And I think this is an important point I want to get across to people, is that you're not just flying in from Amsterdam, doing a training, and then go to some VIP room. You're going to be there to hang out, talk to people who were in your class or those who maybe couldn't take it because they were in a different one. But you're going to have time to just be with the group there and actually get to know people and communicate with them.
Yeah, and I'm so looking forward to that, because then you have the interaction, and then sometimes people want to ask a question maybe they don't want to ask in a room full of others. You can have one-on-one questions, and I'm so honored that everybody's coming and that we're going to be there, and it's going to be amazing. And just to hang out with people, to talk about behavior. You should have had a session for a whole week, Chris.
I know. Well, maybe next time, right? Hey, listen, I'm just happy. I'm just going to be super happy if it happens because of COVID, So I just want to make sure where things are looking good here in the States. We just got a couple of reports from the CDC and the WHO about how even in Orlando, the cases are going down right now. So it's looking positive. We're holding out that hope. So March, we'll see what's happening, but I'm excited.
My lips did disappear for a tiny second. It's like,
let's not let Joe see this one, right?
Oops.
If people want to know more about you, or if they want to follow you, your company, where can they go to interact with you and find out what's happening in your business and life?
I'm on LinkedIn, so people can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's my full name, Anne-Maartje Oud, and that's also on Twitter. And if they want to follow the Behavior Company, it's also on Twitter, Behavior C, or of course www.behaviorcompany.eu. The only thing is, it's spelled the British way, since we started in Europe with everything. So that's the only.
Well, you know what we'll do, everyone? We'll put all those links in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about knowing how to spell her name or the British if you're from America. So we'll put all those links in the show notes. A couple concluding questions that we always ask. Books. It doesn't have to be anything about what we talked about. But is there any books you read recently that you just really enjoyed that you'd like to share with the audience? Because we have a lot of really avid readers that listen to this podcast.
Oh, there's so many books, Chris. I seriously cannot choose. I have 5 books at my nightstand now, and literally my problem is, okay, I don't know what to choose. But I will do something that I would love people to read more. And of course, I would recommend your book and Joe's books, everything, but something completely different that for me is very, very intriguing to read. And I read it a lot, not every day, of course, but it's Shakespeare. Because if you go through Shakespeare's plays and you read it from the behavioral part, so the words are amazing, but if you try to understand it from the behavior part, I think people should read that.
What's your favorite one to read?
I would say, it's a bit, it's too classical, but Hamlet.
Okay.
I love Hamlet.
No, I think there's a lot of behavior in Hamlet, right? And those characters are pretty complex. So that's a great play to read.
And there's this monologue. A lot of people have the well-known monologue, to be or not to be, but there's other monologue. And I'm not going to, you just have to read it. It's really, really good.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. That's actually a unique recommendation. I love it when we get unique ones.
Nice.
We've had a bunch of people give like science fiction or non-technical books, which we always love. But I've not had someone recommend Shakespeare. So that's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that. And who would you consider to be your biggest mentors? The people that helped you get to where you are right now. who would you say? And that, I know it can be exhaustive, and you're going to be worried if you forget a person. Not a big deal. We're just looking for like we spend a couple minutes just gratitude and thinking about those who helped us to get where we are.
Well, if it's about gratitude, I definitely want to talk about Joe because we are business partners. We work together. We've created seminars, but when I talk to him, he's also, every time he has new information, he's so smart. I mean, talking about books, he read 4,000 books. He has this brain that every time he shares something new and he picks up on articles, materials. So what he does, he feeds my brain, my knowledge. And I'm so grateful that he does that. Because every time I learn something, up to the point where I'm like, I cannot, stop. There's too much information here.
Yeah, so, I'm with you actually on that one.
Yeah. But definitely gratitude to Joe.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I feel the same way with him and agree that it's he motivates me to do more. Like his latest book about exceptional people.
Yeah.
I did not expect that from him, that kind of a book.
And be exceptional. It's so,
I'm now listening to it for the third time because I can't seem to get it all. Like, I'm like, okay, I gotta do this like a couple of pages at a time because there's too much content in there. But I agree with that. That's a wonderful, wonderful recommendation. Anna, I cannot thank you enough. As always, the conversations are fun. They're always entertaining and educational. I'm so looking forward to having you here in Orlando and to have you at the Human Behavior Conference. And thank you for your book recommendations and just sharing all your knowledge with us today. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Chris. Every time I agree, we have so much fun. I think we can talk for 3 hours, even more. I'm looking forward to seeing you live when we're in Orlando, but really thank you for doing this. And not just from your part, but also helping others to have this content to, what is it, episode 150 or something? There's so many episodes. 159.
I can't believe it. We've been going at this for 13 years now. That doesn't even register. It's like, what? Really? I can't believe how long we've been doing this, right? So
thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today on the Social Engineer podcast. Next time on the Human Element series, we'll be joined by author Amy Herman, who is also another trainer at HubeCon. So we'll be excited to talk to her about her new book and also about what she'll be talking about at the Human Behavior Conference. Don't forget to check out InnocentLivesFoundation.org and a big shout out for Clutch at pro-rock.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this month, and we will see you next month. See you.